Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Hartsock. I'm a poet and a professor in the English department in the creative writing program here at Oakland University. And we are so pleased tonight to be hosting our third in a row of the kind of Oakland University Writers Series, which has been and will continue to be showcasing OU faculty and our alumna and alumni writers. This year we are so pleased to showcase our very own Annie Gilson, who will be reading her fiction, and OU alum C.R. Grimmer, whose very first book I'll talk more about before I introduce her. It is called The Lime Letters. It is just out. In a wonderful coincidence, Annie got her copy in the mail today, which is just like Providence, kind of showering love down on this reading, I think. So welcome, everyone. Just a couple housekeeping matters. If everybody could please mute themselves and remain muted, I will be until the end, because I'll be introducing Annie, and Annie will read, and then I'll introduce Chelsea, and then Chelsea will read, and then I'll open up the floor to questions. And I think at the end also, after our reading portion has concluded, we will unmute everybody and have a group round of applause. With that said, if, just to please be sure to unmute yourselves, and to mute yourselves. And for your best experience, if you go up in your upper right-hand corner, there should be a view. If you want to set that to get a speaker, that will be the best, because then you'll be able to see, the reader reading will be your main view. I want to thank the English department and the College of Arts and Sciences for continuing to support our creative writing program, which I'll just briefly say is going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. So stay tuned for more events celebrating that to come soon. We'll have readings and then a Q&A, and I am utterly pleased and delighted to be introducing as our first reader, Professor Annie Gilson. Annie has been one of our most beloved mentors and professors in the OU creative writing program for years now. And it's always such a pleasure when students come into my classes or just in conversation, and they blossom forth with enthusiasm and knowledge and insight about craft and elements of fiction that they have learned from Annie. And I see a lot of connections actually between Annie's teaching and her writing. Both are full of what has been called her classic wit, curiosity, her intelligence, and her interest in the supernatural. Indeed, so many students love that Annie is able to bridge the gap between kind of a more conventional literary fiction approach, but also showing the beautiful and the crafted and the admirable in fantasy and speculative fiction. And I think that's one of the true assets to our program, that we are allowing students to have lenses into multiple genres within fiction through especially Annie's enthusiasm and expertise. Her own work has been noted for its lively, intelligent work in fiction, its high standards of craft and art. And I think she brings that to her students and to just the energy of our program every day. So I want to just start by thanking Annie for everything she does for OU. And I know that everybody here is really excited to hear you read your work tonight. And now for the kind of more informational part of my introduction. Annie Gilson has taught at Oakland University for 21 years. She writes both children's fantasy and realistic fiction, and is at work on 5 novels, a YA fantasy trilogy entitled Skyrider, and 2 standalone novels, one entitled Mouse and Goose, the other A Book of Mirrors. Rilke-esque. Her first novel, New Light, and there's a link to that in the chat, explores how the longing to imagine a better world can also lead people into cults. She received a BA in creative writing from Bard College and a PhD in 20th century literature from Washington University in St. Louis. She is represented by Kelly Sonak of the Andrea Brown Literary Agency. Annie, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks so much. That was a lovely introduction. And I want to thank Katie for being the prime mover in setting up tonight's reading. I also want to thank Jeff Chapman, the director of creative writing, and Rob Anderson, the chair of the English department, and the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences for always being supportive, being excited by programming and opportunities that we've been able to offer our students. It's truly a larger community that helps to create this programming and to continue the work that we do. And I want to say that I'm really pleased to be the introductory reader for tonight's OU Alumni and Faculty Reading Series, in that it seems fitting because I'm one of the people who introduced Chelsea to the world 10 years ago after they graduated from OU and began applying to MFA programs. Chelsea then went on to do a PhD as well. And now here we are celebrating their book prize and publication. And as Katie said, my copy arrived today. I kid you not, it's so exciting. And I can't wait to read. And Chelsea mentioned that, I mentioned in the acknowledgements, which is just so exciting. I'm thrilled. Okay, so I love when surprises like that happen. And I love that I'm getting to read with Chelsea, who is one of the bright lights in the world, a lifelong fierce advocate for people who have been marginalized, as well as for the literary arts. It's a great joy to see them realizing their great potential and using their talents. And I'm just delighted and honored to read with them. And I want to say that this is one of the best things about being a teacher. You get to work with brilliant students who then go on to become accomplished and brilliant members of the literary community. And it's just thrilling. It's like nothing else. So now I'm just pulling up the story I'm going to read tonight. And I should just say that I'm not actually much of a story writer, short story writer. I'm totally long form novels, and unfortunately, novels that want to be more than one volume, which makes for a slow time of writing. But it's not just the novels that are slow. The story that I'm reading tonight, which is coming out in Fiction magazine, I guess I don't know, it was delayed by COVID, but it's coming out sometime in the next few months, or year or whatever. But this story also took a lot of time. It's based on a time I lived in New York City and I was working as a waitress at a restaurant called Keen's, which is a really old-timey restaurant that it's on 6th Avenue and 36th Street, and that is actually where where Broadway used to be 100 plus years ago. Broadway slowly moved uptown as Midtown grew in commercialization, but so it was in the theater district 100 plus years ago, and it's got all these pipes lining the ceiling because patrons would come and they would have their own pipe hanging in cabinets. And so they would come and they would smoke their pipes and eat their mutton chops, and it was all very posh, and somehow I got a job there because I'm not a posh person, as anyone who knows me will attest. As probably you can even see from the little window onto my life that you're getting right now. But the reason that I was hired in this posh restaurant was that it was run by this really weird guy, this German who had come to New York. He had made some sort of success of his life in Europe, and he decided that because he was so smart and so successful, he could run restaurants too. So he bought up all these restaurants, these really famous restaurants in New York City, and then he staffed them with whoever the hell he wanted to staff them with. So he had these really intense interviews. So the actual owner interviewed everyone from the waitresses to the kitchen staff to the busboys and whomever else. And so this much is totally true about the story. And it is also true that I did get proposed to when I was working as a waitress there, though the rest of it, not all of what happens in the story is actually true. So I kind of went off from that basic premise. But what's also true is that I worked with this man from Ireland who was just a lovely, lovely person. And we were great friends, and we would go out drinking after our shifts, and we had a really special relationship. And it was a little bit fraught because I was married at the time to a man from Britain. And so the Irish guy didn't like the British guy very much. It was kind of weird. It was political. This was back a long time ago in the 80s. Anyway, so the whole point of this long introduction is that I couldn't finish the story. I wrote the story. I knew it was an important story to me, and it stuck around for 10 years. And then I went to Ireland. I came back and I finished the story. So it's just to tell you that sometimes you don't know what all is happening, but the story was so important. The Irish man's role in it, that I think I just couldn't finish it till I went to Ireland. So anyway, with that said, here is the story called The Proposal. All right. Carolyn found Peter folding napkins in the main dining room. She dropped off the coasters at the service bar and sat down beside him, sliding a stack of pink linen squares into easy reach. They were still warm from ironing. Ming Pei did that. The waiters did the folding. Carolyn didn't mind because she got to talk with people who'd been working at Keen's for years, and she needed the practice. So far, she hadn't managed to get Peter talking about Andy Warhol. The other waiters said Peter had known him, that he used to go to Studio 54 back in the 80s. You could never ask Peter straight out, though, and so far, the only story he'd told Carolyn was about an annoying lady in furs who had asked about the kind of sheep the restaurant used for their mutton and whether the mint jelly was made on the premises. Finally, she wanted a Bellini made from fresh peaches. Peter didn't say they didn't serve Bellinis, just opened his mouth and let his 2 eye teeth fall onto his bottom lip. The lady drew herself up and didn't say a word, and when he brought her a mimosa, she sipped it with an imperious expression as though it was exactly what she'd ordered. Peter mimed it for Carolyn, drawing his upper lip back like Dracula. But his teeth were now glued in permanently. She had to imagine how they looked falling out. Alfred was in a pissy mood. During inspection, he told her to buy new shoes that would hold a shine. She nodded with lowered eyes, but when he climbed the stairs to unlock the front door, she looked up at the ceiling's expanse of clay pipes, smoked by patrons who had come to the restaurant 100 years ago, and felt bold again. She whispered to Hans, does he tie his dickie to his thong? She pictured the fake starched shirt. Oh, sorry about that. Whoops. She whispered to Hans, does he tie his dicky to his thong? She pictured the fake starched shirt front popping up, pulling the thong strap higher and higher up Alfred's ass. Hans didn't answer, just swept past her like a drama queen to greet his first customers, two buxom ladies in turquoise who were settling themselves among their Macy's bags like peacocks, clucking and cooing. Carolyn kept an eye on Hans. She knew he didn't say anything, but Alfred had the sixth sense of the maitre d'. Out of revenge, he saw everyone but her. She smiled at him sweetly and crossed the room to the service bar to talk to Michael. Of course, Alfred swerved toward them every time he came back up the room, but Michael never forgot a drink or botched an order. When other waiters came up to the service bar to order drinks, Carolyn stepped to the side and stared out at our empty tables with the gaze of a martyr. She could feel Michael's eyes on her. After the waiters dispersed with their drinks, he started in again about the bar exam and what he'd do once he passed. She waited and finally he came out with it. Stay or move back to Dublin? Take me, Carolyn said, giving him a long look from under her lashes. He swallowed hard and she felt the heat, laughing and dropping her eyes to the sodden coasters under someone's Guinness stouts. To take her was exactly what Michael wanted, though he hadn't done anything when they went out for drinks after the dinner shift a few nights ago. The beer had gone to her head, and they stood at the entrance to the subway station that would take her back to Queens, Michael staring down at her, trembling. She lifted her face to him, waiting for him to kiss her, but when he leaned forward and put his arms around her, he hugged her like a brother, though his dick against her belly was the size of a log. You're a grand girl, Carolyn, he said in a husky voice, and when he pulled back, she gave him her movie star smile. He smiled too, taking her hand, and started talking about his plans for the future and his family back home. She continued to smile, but she wasn't listening, till he said something in another language, and she looked up at him in surprise. That's Irish, he said eagerly. We were taught it at school. You mean Gaelic, she asked? She'd read a story by an Irish author in her lit class during her one semester at New Paltz. The teacher said that everyone in Ireland had spoken Gaelic before the English came, but now it was a dead language. Carolyn had been struck by the idea that a language could die. Say something else, she'd told Michael, and a long string of sing-song words fell from his red lips, while Carolyn stood entranced. Traffic went by, people passed them to go down into the fluorescent lit stairwell. A drunk couple on the corner started shouting at each other. Carolyn thought of her mother then, how they'd fought before she left. You'll end up pregnant and working at the 7-Eleven, Vera had said. And Carolyn shot back, is that so much worse than your life? You smell like old people. Her mother had snapped her mouth shut and spun away, tottering like a kid's top in her gray scrubs. From the way she groped blindly on the counter for her cigarettes, Carolyn knew she was crying. But Michael's face had been earnest and intent. He had stopped trembling and spoken to her in Gaelic, the sound of it like the songs she'd made up when she was little, when she was up in her room by herself, playing with her polished stones, marching them between the two cords of silk threads she'd laid out on the brown carpet. One of the cords was yellow, the other white, and they shimmered in the overhead light. Come down the sun and the moon road, Carolyn had sung to her stones before returning them to their little leather bag. Now, standing before the service bar in Keen's, she looked up at Michael again. He swallowed hard. Sure, and I will take you, Carolyn. I'll pass the exam here in the States and we can go where we want. To the West then, where people still speak Irish, to the cliffs of Moher, where the sea is wild and beautiful like you. For a moment, Carolyn didn't answer, just shook back her hair and breathed in the intoxicated air. But when she looked up, she found Michael's eyes traveling her body. She was an ocean he wanted to swim. She blinked, then there was Alfred, bearing down with a customer in tow and an evil look for Carolyn. The customer had her fixed with a searchlight gaze. Carolyn, Michael began, but she didn't look at him. Just watched the customer take off his linen jacket, his eyes on her the whole time. Carolyn, Michael said again. She glanced at him then with a sly smile she slid off, mouthing the words, "Got a scoop," pursing her lips to let the last word linger. She'd practiced in the mirror. She knew she looked like Ingrid Bergman in that whistle scene. "Hi," she said, stopping before the customer. The customer didn't answer, just held out the menu to her. Maybe mid-30s, maybe older if he'd been taking care of himself. He looked like he'd been taking care of himself. Hair the raw color of beach sand, those thin muscles men get when they spend time in boats. Except that he didn't have the vacant look that went with the muscles, a stare emptied out by all that ocean they took in, or all that money they made and spent to stand there taking it in. "I noticed you from across the room," he said. "I asked Alfred to put me at your table." Carolyn felt her insides flutter and turned it into the supple sinew of a laugh. "I bet he loved that." She gave him a sidelong look. "He hates it when I flirt with a bartender." "I hate it too," said the man. "I'm the jealous type." "But you'll make an exception this once?" "If I have to." He didn't smile. What did the man want to drink? What did the man want to eat? Would he like fries with that? Just kidding, this restaurant wasn't a fries kind of place. That's right, she'd been here 2 weeks now, though some of the waiters had been here since the 80s. They knew New York. Yes, and the customer knew New York. Yes, it seemed like everyone knew New York. The only person who didn't know New York was Carolyn, but she knew that when she arrived, the city opened for her like a clam. All right, like an oyster, a big oyster with a pearl in it. Yes, they did have oysters on the half shell, and no, she wouldn't mind bringing him some, and yes, it did seem like the kind of dish he'd like. Because when she first laid eyes on him, he looked to her like a man in a boat. What kind of boat? She knew nothing about boats, but she knew about men. "You were talking to him for a while," said Michael, when Carolyn went up to the service bar to get the man's drink. "Do you know him?" "Never seen him before in my life," Carolyn said. "Guess what he ordered? A bottle of Dom." "What's the occasion?" said Michael darkly. Carolyn's laugh bubbled up through her. "Meeting me." Michael didn't say a word. He brought her a bottle of Dom, all cold and drinking up light, then told her not to trust the guy, which made her laugh again. Alfred made it hard. He triple sat her and she was running around, bringing pink cocktails to more ladies with shopping bags, shoving steaks under the chins of sweating businessmen. "What do you do?" she asked the man as she came about. Not, "How's your fish? Is the champagne properly chilled? Do you need another glass?" "Everything," he said with his open seas face. "I'm a friend of Wilhelm's." When she hesitated, he added, "The owner? The man who hired you?" "Oh," she said, blinking as though sunlight dazed. "Mr. Stossel." It woke her up. Peter had told her about Stossel, a rich man from Germany who had bought 3 restaurants in New York. According to Peter, Keen's kitchen manager, Polly, a short Asian woman with a screeching voice who could clear a room in seconds, had been a waitress a year ago. And Stossel's assistant, a young man with a careful haircut and darting eyes, had started out as a busboy at the NoHo Star. He'd handed his boss a sheaf of papers during Carolyn's interview, and Mr. Stossel had written down her answers. She'd been surprised at some of the questions. Where did she grow up? What did her parents do for a living? Where did her father live now? Did she miss him? "I had to see for myself," the customer was saying. He spread his hands in an appraising way, as if presenting Carolyn to herself. "I only met him once," she said. The man smiled. "Once is enough." "That's true," Carolyn admitted, then blushed. "Sometimes." "We think alike," said the man in his smile. She pretended to laugh and surged off again to bring a businessman some A1, though their establishment frowned on that sort of thing. Michael leaned against the counter of the service bar, his face grim, never taking his eyes off her. She drifted past the man's table again. "So, Carolyn," the man said, and she noticed how still he held himself. "So, Carolyn, I'm a collector." "You are? It doesn't mean what you think it means." "What do I think it means?" She took a deep breath, lengthening her spine. "Marry me, Carolyn." "Funny man," Carolyn said. "I'm serious." Carolyn stared. "Will you?" "Sure," Carolyn tossed her head, "as soon as my shift is over." He nodded. At the service bar, Carolyn told the story to Peter, then told it again to Hans. Peter told Carolyn what he knew. The man had made his money that way too. "According to Alfred, he gets what he wants," Peter said. He smiled. He always knew how the story ended. Peter said to Michael, "You can't be serious," and said to Carolyn, "A man like that," and said to Peter, "Don't tell her such things." But it was no use, especially with the man sitting there, sipping his champagne with that look. "Put the check down for me, Peter," Carolyn begged, cheeks as red as the rising sun, as the breeze-blown youth of her hair. But she turned to look at him again, and when he crooked his finger, she shook back her hair and crossed the room. Sitting down beside him made it official. Beyond the banquette, she saw Alfred stop short, his face twisting in a silent scream like that figure from the painting in the MoMA. But Carolyn couldn't enjoy it. The man had leaned over to her and was telling her in her ear what she was going to do that night. "First, you'll put your hair up. Then you'll let the sleeves of the dress you're wearing fall down past your shoulders. We'll get you the dress after dinner. Later, we'll go to the rainbow room. You'll feel better then." "Why will I feel better?" Carolyn said, cooling her blush. The man's eyes on her were steady, but the waters that bore her up heaved. Somewhere, surf lifted up to the sky, then fell, crashing. "Because by then you'll understand. You don't yet, but you will. Lift your breasts. Yes. Drink your champagne. Yes. Smile. Give me your hand. Yes. Lift your chin. No, I'm not going to kiss you. I want you to hold still. Yes. That's right. Good. You don't know this yet, but I can make you happy." Carolyn laughed. She couldn't help it, though she tried to hide it because he wanted her to be impressed. When she was younger, she'd imagined a man who would tell her what to wear and give her stern looks that made her imagining self breathless, her knees go weak. Schoolgirl fantasies. This man didn't know. He couldn't, but here he was. She'd made him appear. Her mother said when she left home, "You'll get exactly what you deserve." And her mother was right. She did deserve him. She had kissed New York, and New York had kissed her back. She wore the lipsticked kiss on her red mouth. Her shoulder beside his square one, his eyes on the people around them as they darted looks at the table, waiters and busboys measuring, adjusting the Carolyn in their minds to fit the person they saw now. She said, "What will I wear for the ceremony?" And he said, "You'll be naked as the day you were born." When she drained her glass, he told her to get them another bottle of champagne.
Thanks, Annie. That was great. On the edge of my seat a little bit at the ending, as if I'm in Keynes watching. Well, I can't wait to talk about that in the Q&A. Just fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you also for your beautiful comments before you read about what a joy it is to watch students blossom into writers and colleagues, and to watch their talents grow and grow. And I just want to say that everyone at the OU program is so proud of C.R. Grimmer and to call them our alum. And I'm so pleased to be introducing their work now. As you'll see in the chat, Chelsea's book, The Lime Letters, is just out, and I see she also posted a discount code for ordering, so please do take advantage of that. And I first encountered Grimmer's work in Poetry Magazine in the poem Boyle-esque, and I was so struck by its dialogue between kind of the texture of the poem and the text of the poem. You can hear them read it also on the Poetry Foundation website. And just the quick, smart moves between lyric, regular rhythm, and then a quick dialogue. And also with like repetition that thinks about the poem's possibility and limits. It's just a love of language that makes you want to sing. So I'm so pleased to be giving this introduction tonight. I will let them tell you a little bit more about the book, but I wanted to share some really cool blurbs. First of all, John Beer has this to say of the Lime Letters. In the depths of this plague year, C.R. Grimmer reminds us that plagues and prohibitions will always be with us, as will exuberance, as will animal companionship. The product of astonishingly deep reading, listening, and thinking, the Lime Letters charts an unruly garden of queer jouissance, self-discovery, and filigrees of connection, all the more worth cherishing for their fragility. Purgita Sharma writes, C.R. Grimmer's world of address is fusing utterance, lyric, and amendments, allowing us into language that thinks through the conditions of being in illness and duration. The prophetic wording into those life seams of impermeability lets us fall into step, her deep grace of deep reckoning. I think that all of these amazing achievements and this beautiful writing was kind of foreseen even in Chelsea's time at OU, when her professors like Annie had things to say about a brilliant synthesizing mind and how she could work with independence and initiative towards goals. Just a student who is passionate, fully engaged, and in love with learning and life. So pleased to be celebrating these long connections and this work tonight. C.R. Grimmer, she, her, or they, them, is a poet and scholar at the University of Washington, UW Seattle. They are the author of The Lime Letters, which was completed with support from a Harlan Hahn Disability Studies Fellowship and from Texas Tech University as the Walt McDonald First Book Award recipient. Their poems are in journals such as Poetry Magazine and Fence. Their research can be found in journals such as The Comparatist. CR created and hosts the Poetry Vlog, a free video and podcast series dedicated to building social justice coalitions and teaching materials through poet and scholar dialogues. Recently, CR completed their PhD in Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of Washington. In addition to serving as communications manager for the Simpson Center for the Humanities, they are also currently a public scholarship project director in the UW Department of English. You are welcome to learn more about their various projects or reach out to them at crgrimmer.com. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you so much. I think I've teared up 3 times so far, actually listening to everyone. I cannot thank you enough for inviting me to be here. I think I've been talking about it ever since the first email, and I was actually just talking to my department chair today, and I was like, I have to go because I get to read at my alma mater. And I think I kind of alarmed him with the fervor that I said it with. So I think whenever I'm teaching or working, if I'm feeling a little bit disheartened, I just remember the mentorship and support I had at OU. I was actually just telling Annie, and I'll just read it actually, the acknowledgement. She's the first person mentioned, which should not be surprising. It said, who first saw the possibilities in both my strange sentences and young adult angst. I also thanked Gladys Cardiff and Linda McCloskey and other folks at OU, just because sometimes academic and poetry world can get a little bit transactional, I think. And I think OU is where I learned that it could actually just be a space to learn and create and play with words and encourage one another. And I was in desperate need of mentorship. And I realize now that I have my own students, how much was given to me So I'll always be indebted. I think Jeff was my first poetry teacher, and then Annie was my first fiction teacher. And Linda's not with us anymore. She's my first nonfiction teacher. So thank you to all of you. And thank you, Katie, for being so generous with the invite and setting this up. Anybody who's in the English department at OU, you're very lucky. And you'll realize it maybe after you leave if you don't already know. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I'm going to read a couple of poems from the Lime Letters, of course. They're very strange. And the book comes out of pretty much the same year as I was at OU, actually, and a little bit afterward. So they're all letters. A lot of them are recurring to the same people. Some of them are actual prescriptions that I repurposed as poems. People think I modified them, but they weren't. They're actual prescription letters that I would get. And they're very much trying to figure out how to navigate, living in a kind of Pentecostal Michigan home and not really being out yet, and having a deep affinity for caretakers in your life that are sometimes your pets and other relationships. So I hope that I can do the program justice today. I was going to also read a bit from the chat book. I'd slated Boylesque because it's fun to read. And I was going to share some of the artwork from it while I read to mix up not having to look at my face so much. And I realized I'm not sure I have share screen enabled. Is that a possibility?
We'll make that happen.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'll just start from the Lime Letters, which my copy arrived a couple days ago. So I'm still kind of processing it. Okay. My dearest blueness, greatest Shiva and Ima closest Ama. Today the streetcar blew me blue, and I, fast tumbling into crowds of hair and hats. Where were you? It stayed a steady June, and the day, please, our masked over connection, do worry long for not my health, but I travel buzzing hymns to you, howling, nipping at your heels. Why did you leave? I just wanted to be yours, chosen to peel asparagus stalks, to peel the thin skin back like olives and birch, but you gave me sisters. Where are my people? I am ready to start a nation. Hair on my arms grows thick like fleece. The day grows blue and thick like fleece. You place it on those sisters, some shorn flock. How certain can a placement be? Drinking stew until they swim in it, sisters watching while ticks tickle and nip furring limbs. Begin again these aching transformations. Begin again your broth. Remember my long-lost letters? I wrote them for you while living in pine, needles in palms, seeking your medicines. Sun-filled veins, burnt as blackened trains, relief from cravings for leaves and sand and a pharaoh dog to lead me? Blue, cool blue figure, you planted hands on my belly and outbirthed your commandments. Where is the flaming foliage? Can you see these covenants traced with salt? I still want the pharaoh dog, so our flaming path obstructed, may it towards one another unfettered remain eternally our care of hearts like yours, paper laden and lover of are. My dearest of gold and yellow days, my third whatnot or what have you. Your halos of hard lemonade drink make parallel O's and drink me slow in the waiting lines for meatless bone broth, pickled cauliflower, marrow. Sing like sirens, sisters, love, in a flowering compost ear. Sing, curing to a buzzing brain. When becoming the age of elder, sister oaths will birth a desert gold land, yet a sleigh and sisterly screeches, and the promised and honeyed lands from I, your Abraham, forever protector against that pyramid looming. You seek my protection and invoke your name, Sarah, sister of gold-coined laughter, laughing at the collection, singing at the collection. These scarabs and scrolls, and your ink overflows, dresses red with it. You never knowing what you want, and you always knowing how to get it. One day, some golden haystacks will bow down to you, and you will laugh at famine bearing and jealousy and love. And when giving a gift, you should gift it gracefully. Give the deserts, and then that last born, blood, doorway dripping with mine, instead a gift. Gift gracefully against those prophesied plagues. Gold on yours, and locusts and ticks and frogs and blood and illness and darkness and gnats and boils and sacrifice on. I read about you, casting nations upon men like nets and golden lineage a rope, and how to take it to weave a bowl. And I hear about you guiding nation after nation into your blondish oceans, a mooring by the three-stringed cord. You truth, me spirit. Three fraying strings turn in the palm. Lineage. Gold under hands, always hands, reaching and pressing. Boat after boat full of men and more men and more men, and yet, sister, I am yours only, removed and bereft of blue thing and taste, are. So in the book, you'll notice, if you read it, hint, that there's a progression in the voice. And the last poems I added, the last feedback I got was that the author, who's R as a character, sort of quasi-generated, quasi-is me, a hybrid, as these things go, had never written them to themselves. So the last few poems are just recycling all of the lines from all the other letters to repopulate a letter to themselves. So you're going to be the first audience I try reading this to. So here we go. My dearest of selves, tire of thine eyes and people in the morning. Death is here, and you plant tree pods for no greenness in keen beach bleached white. Microbiologists grow a third eye on a frog's side, trace the lightning soup, watch molecules choose their living beast. Proposed face and metronomed microbes vibrate into vibrant matter. I'm sitting in on yet another panel on planning for microaggressions, which is my labia laying him into the word and the world. Panelist explaining how two crackers feed the multitudes, how I am the multitude, lurching into boar bodies, how micro means drag a carp off a cliff, means split seed in a mason jar, sprouting accident. When will your diagnosis mean I finally get to sprout a third eye? Green, white, and graveled? I hear your death song, and why do I slip into it like a good little fellow, folds glowing the darkest note I refuse to pry open? All right, and then I'll go ahead and read, I was going to read Boylesque, but I think I won't. I won't now. I'll read one poem from the chapbook. And I think I shared the link to the chapbook. The visual art's also there, so I'll let people peruse the visual art on their own. But the reason I wanted to read from that is because I love the visual art. It was created by a friend that I made in the fiction strand of my MFA program. And we ended up having a very fruitful relationship. And we were talking about the word hewn. We're both vaguely obsessed with it for some reason. And they produced this beautiful black and white ink series that they were willing to let be reproduced for the chapbook as well. And I love it because I think it demonstrates the types of unexpected collaborations that can happen when you have friends that are also interested in the kind of uncanny, strange things in the world. And so I want to share a poem from that. So, my dearest love technique. I entered this city, emeralds on my fingers, your voice at my throating. A spire slips into the ocean and an orca mother carries dead infants. 5 days, 5 days, 5 days, I hear. You're much too young, you lisp through me. Construction site, a browner bourbon, a lusher performance, velvet from 1965. At the club, purple hues itself to you, thus to me. Silver thread threading my hair, your fingernails, this corner by go-go dancers slinking out an olive water offering. I drive an I-5 overpass and you choke through me. What a scene. Rainier cherry popping mountains, dripping skylines. The needle threads vocal cords and you move through it. 5 moves, 4 years, 1,000 days, slipping me emeralds from the Puget's salt, hewing them the year 1989 on repeat. New order roils in the sun-soaked streets. I wear your technique as rain's latest deluge. You say Genet is my outlaw, but I throw out in fine time, wearing my own teeth as emerald song. I ocean this city, its salted voice, silver-threaded you singing, you're much too young, much too young. That's all I got. I mean, I could read more for you if you'd like, but that was my time allotment.
Oh, I ocean this city. I love that so much. Well, I would invite everybody to unmute for a second and let's have a round of applause together for our two wonderful readers tonight. Thank you so, excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you so much. I would love to open up our time for Q&A. Who would like to ask some questions and start a discussion? I see Alex's hand up. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Professor Gilson. I really loved your short story, and I also loved all of your poetry, C.R. Grimmer. I'm going to be purchasing both books now. But I did have a question for Professor Gilson about why you chose to end the short story before like finding out anything of what was happening with this man in the restaurant, because now I want to know like what she was gonna find out, like, but I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, so the last line, I'm gonna just pull it up. So he's after he says you'll be naked as the day you were born. When she drained her glass, he told her to get them another bottle of champagne. And to my mind, that is the whole story right there. She is going to serve him for the rest of her life if she stays with him. And, you know, basically once she made that decision to sit down with him and he, you're going to have to excuse my French, but he basically said, fuck you for flirting with a bartender. Now you have to go and face him to ask for another bottle of champagne. So A, you're still serving me, and B, you have to look Michael in the eyes and he doesn't get you. So that was my thinking, Alex.
Very cool thinking. I also am on the edge of my seat when that story ends, but I also love the idea of unity and completion you see there. That's so great. There's 2 questions in the chat. First, I'll ask the one that's a little bit more following what you just said, Annie. Jeff Chapman asks, did it always end on that line? Did you have more written before this current revision?
No, I didn't get that last line till the Ireland trip. But so no, it didn't end with that. I was trying to figure out what he wanted, and I realized that he was really, really set on making it clear that that she does not get to flirt with the bartender, that she does not get to. So on the one hand, he wanted to control her. That's the kind of man he was, and she didn't mind that. But he wanted her to know it was serious, and by having to go face Michael, because the whole thing is still a fantasy to her, right? But having to face Michael and ask for another bottle of champagne, that's going to make it real. That's going to, and he is much better at the kind of abusive emotional relationships than she is. I mean, she's got some prowess there, but he's better. He's older. He's been living that life, and so yeah. I hope that makes sense, Jeff.
Yeah, totally. When she goes and asks Michael for that bottle, it's so painful. It's just like, it's really cringing. Annie Williams asked, this is a question for both Annie and CR. What was your first impression of each other?
Oh boy. So I worked with Chelsea for so long that I can't remember the first impression, because that first impression was overlaid by so many we worked together for years. I was I helped you
my thesis advisor for the honors college as well. You helped me with my internship situation, which I was working too much. And Annie saved me in a very physical sense. That makes sense. I have a first impression. I think that my first class with you was not actually the writing workshop. I think it was a class on the other. And it was the first, and I took night classes and worked during the day. So I ended up taking as many classes as I could with the same folks that I liked at night in night classes. And I remember feeling very comfortable right away with expressing the not right answer, actually, which is, if you know me well, is a very rare thing. Where I felt very much like, okay, this person is totally fine with talking, instead of the kind of, here's the answer and you better have it right the first time, and like facilitating conversation. I think you're the first professor I'd ever had in a class that when we were sitting in a circle and someone didn't talk, would just make everyone else stop and ask the other person to speak up. And I actually really appreciated it too, if that makes sense. So mostly just feeling very comfortable with like, okay, this is someone who cares about the thinking process, I think Annie also helped me with my sentences because they're a mess. They're still a mess. But she was the first person to explain to me why they were a mess. And that, I think, mattered, because it was like, oh, it helped me feel like I could be learning in a way that respected the way I think, but also thought about how others read it. I don't think anyone had ever taken the time before. They were usually just kind of like, fix this. And I'd be like, I don't know why it's wrong, So I think a lot of different levels of comfort and excitement. So
I remember those you coming over and sitting in the backyard and just going over those sentences and like, let's untangle this. And but what I remember so vividly is just that you always brought your best self to class, that you always were curious, you had a questing mind, you were passionate and empathic. And so to me, it's no surprise, right, that a person who went on to be a terrific, talented writer and a terrific and talented teacher was the ideal student in a class, right? And so And I'm sure that everyone here at this reading has also been the ideal student in classes, because that's why we're here, right? Because we love this. And so it was just a great, joyous time to be in the classroom together, and we pass it along. So I felt like I got to pass on the great gifts I got from my teachers, and I know, Chelsea, you're doing that with your students, and it just gives me such joy.
Whenever I think I'm getting sick of my students, I remember how much time Annie poured into me, and I'm like, temperate. Remember the gifts you've been given. So generosity was a big piece of it, I think, too. I mean, I wrote pretty cringe-worthy writing. Like, I can't. I tried looking at it a little bit, I think 2 years ago, and then promptly put it in a deep backup drive to never surface again. And I would not have known it based on how kind, Jeff and Annie were about it. I felt very much encouraged, and that doesn't always happen. I think in my MFA, some of the instruction is very much it's good or it's bad, and I think gifted teachers like yourselves are able to say this is how you can build on this, and make it still fun. So. Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, so many hearts. We have two great questions in the chat. Keegan Deloney wants to ask both of you, what was it like to publish your first pieces?
Oh, and it's probably easier for me because Annie's so much longer published. I think the first time I got a poem published, I was just ecstatic. Anyone had accepted a poem, I was shocked, I get probably like 100 rejections plus to every acceptance. And so I just assumed it would happen one day in the long, far away future, and I keep sending stuff out. I'm fortunate to have changed names enough since then that nobody can find it. But at the time, I was ecstatic. I felt like validated in the submission process, but also just excited to feel like I was part of the circulation of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was at work at a nonprofit, and my coworker was really sweet and gave me a gift of a cupcake because they actually found out before I did for some reason. So, yeah.
Jeff wants to know, do you remember where it was? Like, what was the first acceptance, the poem or the place?
Yes, it was Diverse Voices Quarterly. I'm so embarrassed about this poem. I think they've changed their name since then, and I wouldn't know what it is. I was very excited, and I think it was good encouragement. That was also back when, unless it was published online, you submitted most things by hard copy, so you get these rejection envelopes. And I lived at home with some pretty intense family dynamics, as my book reveals. So it was kind of like physical rejections coming in all the time. So I think it was just another specialness to it. But yeah. Do you remember your first, Annie?
My first was actually poetry, because I when I was in grad school, I was a poet. I was not a fiction writer. I only discovered I was a fiction writer when I wrote my dissertation, which basically taught me how to be, to do the long form. And so that's, but as I spent more time with the dissertation, I just thought, oh my God, I can't write poetry. I've got to, this is narrative. And so, so Southern Poetry Review was my first publication many, many years ago. And then I just started writing fiction.
I will say, I think Jeff and Annie's classes combined created, and none of my poem projects are without narrative. I think that like Annie's influence around narrative, and then the conversations bouncing between the two of you. Even my new book project is another character, and it follows a narrative too. So I just don't write linearly as well as Annie does.
Can I, a funny side note to that, Chelsea, is that, like I mentioned before, that was my first semester at OU. And the fact that I was teaching a poetry class was sort of out of left field a little bit because Gladys Cardiff was on sabbatical, so they needed someone to fill in for. I think it was at the time it was like English 3 something, whatever the poetry intermediate. Oh no, there wasn't even an intermediate poetry workshop at the time. It was just the poetry workshop, and
Yeah.
I was like, sure, I can pretend. But
It was great.
it was, I mean, it was super fun, but it was a very, I sort of like, sure, I'll go in there in my first semester and teach a poetry workshop. But yeah, it was sort of lucky to end up with it was a really great workshop, but it was
It was a
sort
really
of
good group.
odd circumstance.
I think that speaks to something we tell our students all the time, which is that whatever genre you want to write in, you're only going to help yourself by writing in all the genres. And I think that's something that our students continue doing here, which is great. We have a couple more chat questions. Anna Bronkhurst wants to know, both of you have amazing alliterations that you use. Is there a type of figurative language that you enjoy writing the most?
I've never thought about it in terms of preference. Sorry if I'm still thinking about that.
I mean, for fiction, you have to really be careful of too much alliteration or metaphors or similes. You want strong ones to really, you know, make the piece come alive. But if they're too fancy, they derail the narrative line. They make it feel too precious. And I think that story that I wrote really walks that line. There are moments that I looked at, you know, I reread it this morning and I was like, oh shit, some of that's a little dicey. I mean, but on the other hand, you know, it's there because of this character who is really engaged in this kind of lyrical, you know, self-exaltation. So if it for, and this is just a response for fiction, if it serves the characters, I can do whatever it does, you know, whatever I need to. I can put in as much lyricism if the characters are saying, you know, that's me. I'm going big on my, you know, sort of champagne drinking up light, the intoxicated air. That's her imaging, you know, so I could do it, even though I, as a writer, was like, that's a little rich. But so that's my response. Go ahead, Chelsea.
I actually realized there's some overlap because the poems I read today were all from R except for one of them, but there's a couple of poems throughout the book that aren't, and the sounds change pretty stark. They shift to a pretty they're a little bit less mouthy. I don't know how to put it. Like, they're not as much of a like just playing around in sound to them. They're much sparser. Or they go the other direction, they get lyrical without allowing as much room for deviation from the lyrical mode. So I don't know if I have a favorite. I think the bad answer that I have, I guess, is that I grew up as like a skater, dancer person. My family they were all musicians. They still are. And so I think it's more like if the character, how musical the character wants to get in relationship to how it'll feel when I read it out loud with my body, if that makes sense. And so that might sometimes be alliteration, but sometimes it's internal rhyme. Sometimes it's intentionally mixing metaphors because it makes me want to laugh. So then I get a different bodily reaction. There's a lot of really bad Bible and academic puns in the poems. And then they're tweaked by sound to have fun with how it feels to do it out loud. I think I told my MFA mentors, I started to see poetry as kind of the next option for feeling these things in an embodied way when your body can't move like it used to move. So I don't know if there's a single figure of speech so much as a type of embodiment depending on who's doing the speaking. And that then creates its own figures, I guess you could say. So.
And I would just add on to that. This isn't exactly a figure of speech, but I really love your interruptions, Chelsea. Like this, like kind
I'm
of.
so glad not everyone does.
Yeah, I love the moments that the speaking self interrupts, and then like the pauses you give in your reading. It's really it just really like draws me in, and I love it. So I know it's not exactly figure of speech, but it's an element that I really admire.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we have time for a couple more questions. Milena, where did your question go? Milena wants to ask both of you, what advice do you have to young writers trying to get their work out?
I mean, I'll just recycle the advice Annie gave me, so Annie should go first.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chelsea.
All right, and then you can tell me if I've recycled your advice well, which is basically get very comfortable with rejection. If that makes sense. You have to depersonalize from rejection. You know, like I think that it's weird now to hear other people narrate me as successful, and I feel like happy with how I've succeeded, but the iceberg of rejections under it are just enormous. And I think what I've watched, because I've been in a good number of programs now, right? So like 3 graduate programs, everyone in those programs are trying to publish. And what I've noticed is the people that do continue and get their work out there are willing to get rejected over and over without it becoming this like wounding to their writing that they can't sustain. I have colleagues that are way better writers than me at academic prose, and they're way less published because they just really struggle with the peer review process or struggle with the rejection piece. So it's simple, but I think the other would be to pay attention to the aesthetics of different places and poets that are in them or writers that are in them. And if you actually feel that you want to be in conversation with them instead of just kind of randomly spaghetti walling it, right? Like, do you actually want your piece to be next to these poets, or are you just submitting there for the sake of getting published? You know, and that comes through really fast when you're submitting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add and is that just be really, really down with your own self. That is to say, really find your voice and don't worry too much about the publishing if you can at the start, because it's really about you learning what you have to say, how you want to say it, and that's going to take years. It's going to just be a long process, and let yourself love it. Let yourself at times, you know, be frustrated and angry at yourself for not doing as much as you want or being as popular or publishable as you want, but then just go back to it, embrace it, because what you have is something that only you can say. No one else. And every writer's journey is different. You can't look at me or Chelsea or anybody else here and say, oh, I didn't do it like they did it, so it's not going to happen. It's going to happen if you continue to do it, but you don't know how it's going to happen. And if you aren't willing to be open to the long process, the long slog of exploring your voice, exploring your unconscious, tempering that unconscious creativity with your conscious craft and your reading and your deep thinking about the things that you care about, both aesthetically, subject matter, etc., you have to be willing to just be in it for the long haul and trust yourself. More than anything else, you have to trust yourself, because again, since nobody else's career path is going to be like yours, you have to just be like, okay, it's only me. only I can do this. You have to have friends and fellow writers and care about other people's work. So don't just be all by yourself doing it, but also know that that you are the only one who can do it in the end. The other thing I would just add is I think Neil Gaiman has a really good little soundbite advice, and that is when you get feedback from other people, if a reader tells you that there's something wrong with your writing, 99% of the time they are right. But if they tell you how to fix your writing, 99% of the time they are wrong. So that's just keep that in mind, because usually there's a little voice in your head that's going to be like, that's not quite right. I don't want to deal with it. And you push it away and you forget about it, or you come back, circle around. But just remember that it's a long process, and that revision is really important to that process.
I want to second all of that. I realize I should be, if it helps, anecdotally, I think the Lime Letter poems were all written 10 years ago now, and they got put in a drawer because they kept getting rejected and the feedback was conflicting. They're my least successful poems are in the book, but I love the book more than my more successful poems, right? So I think sometimes keeping in mind what you would want to also read, and kind of letting pieces sit for a while until you can come back to them and actually read them from that perspective. But I mean, it wasn't, I mean, the poems read today are the two that I think have been rejected the most, but they're probably my favorite at the beginning, right? So it's also about maybe deciding early on the relationship between your desire to publish and what gets published, and your desire to read your own writing and how you want it to be and who you want interacting with it. Right.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. I am gonna go back in the chat to a question from Steph. And I think this question comes from Chelsea, you're mentioning your honors college thesis, but Steph writes, CR, the HC can tend to cater towards majors in terms of the thesis and thesis proposal. Do you have any advice for people who are pursuing a creative project? And I might just enlarge that question a little bit to ask you to talk a little bit about how you've presented your creative and critical kind of two sides, because that's something I think is so valuable, and that maybe has been part of, like I know you received a couple fellowships to, work on your writing, and, we could expand out a little bit from Steph's great question to taking that outward.
That's tough. The Honors College has also changed leadership since I was there. So when I was there, there was Jude Nixon, and then there was Barbara Maybe, who I'm actually still friends with. So we still interact together. My sweetheart just graduated from OU 2 years ago now, maybe, and was in the Honors College in the STEM side of things, and they had totally different leadership. My thesis, to be super clear, was not creative. It was actually arguing for the necessity of creative. Right. So it was, Annie was the advisor for it. And it was about, I was running creative writing workshops in Detroit public schools, which some problematicness, but I think was good for where I was at. And Annie was amazing with it. And it was basically talking about what it did to take creative writing seriously as a necessary academic mode of writing. And I mean, Honors College liked it a lot, right? We hosted a field trip for the students after doing a writing contest. I think it was a good undergrad thesis. But I think that's an argument I'm still fighting, to be honest. When I did my MFA, they were kind of like, you write creative writing, not critical, like separate them. And then I did my MA, and they were like, stop at the poems and write the critical. And then so it's actually a kind of bigger war that you're stepping into that I think a lot of people are kind of on the front lines with right now. I can't speak to the Honors College's culture now, but my instinct, if you were in the programs that I teach in, would be to create some really rock solid framing that kind of justifies it through arts-based methods and just kind of borrow the language of arts-based methods to articulate the need for and why that creative project will do it. I think Camilla Davis, she runs the National Youth Poet Laureate Program, and we've worked together on the poetry vlog. She has some great publications that have already done that work, right? So you could just kind of look to people who've already made that case and then kind of build on that to frame it so you can still do it. But Annie might be able to actually answer this better because Annie would still know the honors college culture and probably still advises theses, right? So that's one where I don't want to overspeak on the possibilities, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. I'm just putting in the chat right now that all you honors college students who are saying, me too,
Yeah.
connect with each other, because if you don't know each other, you should know each other, because you're all creative writing students who love that and are walking that same line that I walked and that Chelsea walked. I will say that there's a big difference now, because the dean of the Honors College is Graham Harper, who is a fiction writer. So you have a major ally there. And he is one of the most dedicated, hardworking people I know. And if you make it known to him that you are a fiction writer, that you have these passions, etc., you are going to come to his attention, because more than anything else, I mean, he loves all his honors college students, of course, but he especially loves you.
Thank you again. So that one more question from chat, and I think this will be our last question. Maria Anna writes, do you have any suggestions to continue to learn and become a better writer?
All right, I'll go first this time. So Maria, hi. I know it's so hard when you're out of school and you don't have the classes to inspire you, and I know it can be frustrating and lonely too, but you are a really good writer, and I know that you will continue to engage with it. I would say though, besides, taking advantage of how many online readings there are now, so that's like crazy good for people who don't have a lot of money to attend these things, or the geographical proximity to attend really great readings. You can do that now. But I think just as important is just continuing to read. Continue to find the stuff that you love to read. Read around in journals so that you can see what kind of new stuff that kind of rings your bell is out there. All that will be really helpful. But also remember that what we talked about in class, and that is make writer friends, right? Reach out to writer friends, because like you, they are in that lonely world, right? Of being in the beginning stages or the intermediate stages of developing a writing habit, developing a publishing presence. And it takes so long, and it can be so lonely, that you really need to reach out to people who are in your classes, who are here right now. I mean, I would encourage y'all to put your emails in the chats, anybody who wants to be writer friends, because these are your people right here. And now I will let Chelsea pick up.
It's pretty much the same advice. I'll give some examples actually. I have a group. This is embarrassing, so I'll just give the full explanation. We call ourselves CAWK because our acronym is CAWK. And I actually got the idea for my dissertation writing. So there's 4 of us, and we meet every other week, and we have a Google Doc, and we say, here are the things I want to be doing in my writing life over the next 2 weeks, and here's how I'm going to reward myself if I do them. And we will add in, like, take a break from reading so-and-so, play a video game. Like, we'll add things in that aren't writing, so that it's not like writing is now my other degree again, if that makes sense. But I have found having that accountability group can be really life sustaining, because you have a place where you can very safely talk about what you're actually wanting to do and bounce the ideas off of each other. And then you have a game plan coming out of it. And then you have an accountability group you return to. And it's not workshopping, which, to be fair, I think post MFA, I got a little workshop burnt out. I got more than a little workshop burnt out. There's such a thing as too much feedback. Yeah, there's definitely such a thing as too much feedback after a while. Sometimes you just need to sit with all the feedback you've gotten until you can internalize it and apply it to your own writing on your own, right? So not necessarily you network to workshop, but just sitting down for an hour and saying, here's how much I want to read, here's who I want to read, here's 2 places I want to submit, and here's amount of time I want to spend writing and the type of writing I want to do. You meet next week, you're like, I didn't get any of that writing done, and you talk about what's going on, right? But it's it can be life sustaining during a pandemic if you're someone who needs a kind of forced time stamp where you're checking in with folks, and it can also be life sustaining for keeping yourself accountable to what you value, because I think other things start getting in the way. And also writing in weird places. Like, I mean, I started writing poems on my phone in a app where I would write 1 or 2 lines at a grocery store. And journals love those poems. They're not my favorite poems, but journals like those poems just fine. And my friends like those poems. And now I read them and I like them. And it wasn't, I sat down for 2 hours and hammered out another piece of my manuscript, right? It was finding small places to kind of get some words down and play around again with it. But that accountability group is gold. It's also why I finished my dissertation. So I'm a big apocalypse of it.
Well, I would love to invite everybody to unmute one more time and give one final round of applause for our terrific readers and also this terrific discussion. And I hope you guys are making connections in the chat. And if not, I'll check the transcript and make sure everyone's connected. So yeah, please unmute. One more round of applause for Annie and NCR.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much for coming.
Thank you, Katie, for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It was
Katie.
so nice.
Thank you.
The pleasure.